Well, good evening and welcome to our Sunday with Survivor program with child Holocaust survivor Eva Kessner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Before we get our program started, I want to just encourage you that during the presentation, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat window, and we will make sure after Eva's presentation to have some discussion. I also want to take a moment to put in some advertisements for some of our other upcoming programs. So this coming Wednesday, I'll be back for my next Curator's Corner when I talk about particular images and objects in our collection. And I will be talking this coming Wednesday about an iconic image from the Adolf Eichmann trial, which issued its verdict on December 15th, 1961, 60 years ago this coming Wednesday. Then after the new year starts, on Tuesday, January 6th, Dr. Linda Burkhardt, our scholar in residence, will be giving a talk about Washington Heights, a neighborhood in Upper Manhattan that became a particular haven for German and other European Jews fleeing from the Nazis. And one more program to mention, we'll be holding our second program in our new 2G Tuesday series on January 11th at 6 p.m. when 2G Debbie Cohn will talk about her mother, Ilse Loeb, who grew up in Vienna, but in the wake of Kristallnacht at the age of 13, was sent to the Netherlands for safety. Ilse was later forced into hiding and moving to various locations, was able to keep ahead of the Nazis. She survived the war, but she never saw her parents again. So I hope you'll join us for those programs. You can find more information about them and a full list of our upcoming programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org, and then click on the events tab. Okay, with those announcements taken care of, let me shift to tonight's program and stop sharing my screen, among other things. To lead us into tonight's program, I'd like to introduce the man who's behind our Sunday with Survivor programs at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, and that is Mr. Michael Mantell. Michael is a 3G. Two of his grandparents are survivors, and they instilled in him the need to not let this history, the larger history of the Holocaust, be forgotten. At the end of 2020, Michael contacted us to arrange a survivor to speak for a group of his family members. And after the program ended, we had further discussions with him, and we agreed that this wasn't something that should be limited to just a single family, and we should open it up to the public. And our Sunday with Survivor series was started. I'm grateful for Michael's continuing support and the interest from both him and his whole family, and turn it over to him to introduce our speaker. Michael.
Thank you so much, Thorin. As always, thank you to you and to everyone at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for all of the incredible work that you do. And thank you, Thorin, for all the work you do before, during, and after these events to make Sundays with Survivors the success that it is. I'm seeing so many new faces and many friends and family I've seen on these Sundays with Survivors. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today and those watching this recording. And a special thank you to all of the survivors, especially today's guest, Eva Kessner. Welcome to Sundays with Survivors. Sundays with Survivors is an online platform that gives Holocaust survivors the opportunity to share their testimonies with people all over the world. And following the huge success of this Sundays with Survivors series, we've added a new program which started last month called 2G Tuesdays, as Thorin mentioned. 2G Tuesdays is also a virtual platform that provides children of Holocaust survivors the opportunity to share their parents and family stories with all of us. Recently, the Claims Conference conducted a survey on Holocaust knowledge, and the results were alarming. It found, for example, that 20% of Gen Z and millennials in New York State hold the belief that Jews caused the Holocaust. And almost a third think it's totally acceptable for someone to hold neo-Nazi views. Also, according to this survey, New York State has the highest percentage of Gen Z and millennials who believe the Holocaust is a myth and did not happen. That's New York State. one of only 18 states in the US that mandates some form of Holocaust education. And all of this while we are fortunate to still have Holocaust survivors with us to share their testimonies. These numbers are staggering and underscore the important mission of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center to teach the history of the Holocaust, its lessons, and to promote tolerance. This is why it is so important for all of us to continue to support organizations like the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. If you'd like to learn more about HMTC, please visit their website at hmtcli.org. Today, child survivor Eva Kessner will share with us information about her Viennese family's survival in Nazi-occupied France and their harrowing escape to Switzerland in 1942 at the height of the final solution. While you listen to Eva's testimony, you may have questions or comments. We invite you to ask and share at the end of the program during the Q&A portion. Please use the raise hand emoji if you know how to do that, or you can unmute yourself if we do not see your virtual or actual hand raised. You can also write your questions and comments in the chat, and Thorn and I will ask your questions for you. Before I turn the floor over to Eva, I want to ask everyone to please save the dates for our next 2G Tuesdays event, which will be held on January 11th, and our next Sundays with Survivors event, which will be held on January 23rd. We hope to see all of you there and hope you invite your friends and family to join us for these free online programs. So thank you everyone for being here. And with all of that, I welcome Eva.
Hi, good evening to everybody, and thank you in advance for joining us here to tell my family's story. So my name, as you heard, is Eva Kessner, and this is a story of how I and my immediate family survived the Holocaust. I tell the story together with my mother, Giza Razdow, who made a video of our story for the Shoah Foundation, which is a video archive of Holocaust survivor testimonies. It starts with my family living in Vienna, Austria, as you can see in the map. They had a good middle-class Jewish life in Vienna. However, my father's family was pretty poor. His dad died when he was only 4. Here you see my dad standing on a chair with his parents, Aaron and Tony, and his younger brother, Walter. My mom's parents came to Vienna from a shtetl when my mother was 5 years old. It was a small Jewish town in Eastern Europe. And my Opa, you can see there, Opa Solomon, my grandfather, came from Czernowitz, and he had very little money. He built his own successful import-export business, and the children got good educations, although their parents had little or no schooling. Here you see my mom on the left with her sister Meta, her brothers Hans and David, and and Opa. They went to concerts, art shows, museums, to the mountains in the summer. There was anti-Semitism, a hatred of Jews, but it didn't really interfere that much with their lives. Except, you have to know that my Oma had a premonition, and she did not allow her children, her 4 children, to go into fields that were not in science, which could be transferred to another country if necessary. My Uncle Hans wanted to be a lawyer and she wouldn't let him. And so he became a chemist. So it already started to feel like something was going wrong. World War I changed everything. Anti-Semitism increased, and even the teachers were insulting Jews in class. At Vienna University, my dad was told he better work a lot harder because it was going to be much more difficult for Jews to pass. Despite that, my parents were both successful in college. This is a picture of my dad's college ID. Both of my parents graduated with PhDs in physics from Vienna University, but they actually couldn't get jobs in Austria because they were Jews. So they got married and they moved to Paris, where they had better employment opportunities. My sister Hannah was born in October of 1936, and France was still a safe place, and the rest of the family was still safe in Vienna. Meanwhile, in Germany, Hitler, who had become chancellor in 1933, was passing laws to persecute Jews, restricting all aspects of their lives, where they could work, go to school, who they could be friends with, and segregating them from the rest of the public. And here's a beautiful picture of my mom and dad's wedding. My family's safe life changed in 1938. Hitler took over Austria and he annexed it. It was called the Anschluss, making it part of Germany. And you can see on the little map there how Austria became Germany. And you see Hitler marching into Vienna to the great cheers of the crowds lining the streets. Most of Austria welcomed Hitler and the Nazis. Overnight, life changed for Jews in Austria, where my mother's whole family still was living. Nazis started to humiliate the Jews, as these pictures show you. The family was terrified. And this is a video of my mother describing what it was like.
And came 1938, March 1938, and that was when everything collapsed for our family. That was the Anschluss, when Hitler marched into Austria. And I mean, that was like somebody hit you on the head. All of a sudden, everything that you felt so safe about just disappeared. And came.
Jews no longer had any rights, citizenship, or protection. The Nazis arrested my grandfather. My Oma frantically went around trying to collect money from relatives to bribe his way out of prison. She had to pay the Nazis and promise that he would leave Austria, he would emigrate for them to let him go. So my mother talks about that as well.
This was a bribe. But this way they got them, and they had to promise that they'll emigrate. They wanted them out. So you needed, of course, all sorts of things, that you don't owe any taxes, and that you have a clean record, and all this red tape that was necessary for immigration, and then they let them out. They didn't emigrate right away because they had, my mother wouldn't leave before all her children are safe. In the beginning, everybody could have gotten out, but nobody let them in. So people believe now they could not get out. It's true. Later, in 42, but not in 38, not in 39, not in 40. It was very easy to get out. It was impossible to get in.
At this point, the Nazis wanted Jews to leave Germany, which now included Austria. Hitler had passed laws that said Jews were not allowed to own businesses or work in many professions. One of OPA's top non-Jewish employees walked in one day and said, that he was taking over the business and that if he didn't do it, somebody else would. Jewish kids were thrown out of public schools. People were beaten if they complained. And Mom's family, my mother's family, knew that they had to get out. My parents, already living in Paris, helped Mom's family get out of Vienna and come to Paris. They had to leave everything behind. They all gathered in Paris, hoping it would be safer there. My father was afraid that war might spread to France, and he thought it would be more secure for the family away from Paris. They all moved to a town along the coast called La Bernerie in northern France. You can follow my family's move from Vienna to Paris to La Bernerie on the map. Hitler controlled the red and striped areas of Europe at this point. So you can take a look at that. On September 1st, 1939, World War II began when the Nazis invaded Poland. England and France were allies of Poland and declared war on Germany. And my mother talks about that.
We heard it on the radio. My mother didn't believe it. She said, people will never want war again. You know, she lost both her brothers in the First World War. She was a really ardent pacifist. But we had war, and the next morning, the police came and arrested all the men.
The French police.
The French police, because they were enemy aliens. Austria had become Germany, and we were Germans. And we were sent, the women and children were sent to a little town in Bretagne. The little town was called Chateaubriand, where we had to report to the police every week. We were allowed, we were completely free, but we were not allowed to leave this town. And that's how our life, our comfortable, nice life ended. The men were not here. We finally found out where they were. There was a camp where they stayed. And after a few months, they let the older ones go. And so my father came out.
So how did my family, Jews escaping Hitler, become enemy aliens in France? Well, remember, Austria became part of Germany. So now we were Germans living in France, and life was very hard in Chateaubriand. The men were gone. We had no heat or running water. You had to use a neighbor's pump to get water.
In the meantime, I had my second baby in November 39. Eva was born. She was, of course, French, since she was born in France. And that gave us certain advantages, because when you had what they called in attache française, it means you had a close relative who is French, and that was my daughter. So I had certain protection.
So you can see my birth certificate here. Eve Catherine was not the greatest time or place to be born, but my birth in France gave me French citizenship, and this gave my family some privileges. They let my dad out for a visit, and my mother was permitted to go to Paris. She went there to find wartime jobs for my dad and for my Uncle Hans. With proof of this work, they were let out of these detention camps where they had been interned. And the men moved to Paris and worked there, while the women and children had to stay in Chateaubriand, but not for long. In the spring of 1940, the Nazis invaded France. You can see the tan arrows on the map that show the routes the Germans took in their invasion. They marched through Belgium and Luxembourg. The men were arrested again and sent to camps where my father was forced to build airstrips for the French Auxiliary Army. We didn't know where they were sent. No one thought the invasion would ever happen, and people began to leave their homes. Roads were clogged with people going south, trying to evade the occupiers. And the Germans rolled in and bombed their way into northern France.
And we were sitting there and deliberating what to do. Should we hire somebody with a carriage? Or then when we saw what's happening, people with crying babies, not being able to change them, no water. I mean, it was really terrible. I said, are we willing to go through this? We just stay. What can happen? 3 women and 3 little girls. So we stayed. We stayed, and what will happen will happen. And we heard, in the evening, we heard airplanes. And then they circled the town. And we were told later that if they would have been shot at, they would have bombed the town. But since nothing happened, they declared the town open, and they didn't do anything, and they just marched. The tanks rolled in. All night we heard the tanks rolling. And that was it. We were occupied by the Germans.
So there we were hiding in Chateaubriand, trying to make ourselves invisible. A large Nazi flag hung from the town hall. Soldiers were everywhere. One even came to the door and wanted to use our place to house soldiers. But my mom talked him out of it because she said she had a baby, which was me, that cried all night. So they left us alone for now. And they didn't know who we were and that we were Jews. France surrendered to the Nazis and was divided into occupied and unoccupied zones. Northern and Western France were occupied by the German army. Southern France remained, quote unquote, unoccupied and governed by a French collaborative government, the Vichy government. You can see the white line on the map that separates the 2 areas on the map. We were in Chateaubriand in the occupied zone.
So we were sitting there deliberating what to do, because we were running out of money. And we were terribly, terribly scared about our men. We didn't know, absolutely had no news. We didn't know whatever happened to them. And one morning, my little girl, Hannah, 3 years old, woke up screaming and crying. I said, what's the matter? Why are you crying? I said, I cry because I don't have a daddy anymore. That hit me. I thought, my God, this child, maybe she feels something, You cannot really describe your feelings and your mood that you were in, the uncertainty. So we decided, in any case, we cannot stay here. We have to do something.
There was a French town official who destroyed all the records of the refugees who were staying in the town before the Germans entered. He did this to protect them. This way, the Germans wouldn't be able to find and persecute the Jewish refugees. He was a real upstander who tried to help in the best way he could. When it became too dangerous for us to hide there, the French official helped us get travel papers. He got the German commandant of the town to sign and stamp the papers. That stamp would become very important. The town official had convinced the commandant that we were from Marseille, a town in the south of France, and that we were just going home. We decided to leave and to try to get across into the unoccupied France. We were told not even to try because the Germans were not letting anyone out of the occupied France territories. My mother decided that we had to get out of there before the Nazis found us. So we boarded a train, and you can see where we were on the map, up in Chateaubriand, in the pink area in occupied France, and the green line shows the train route. We left and traveled south. Our destination was Marseille, at the end of the green line in Free France. And my mother will tell you about what happened when we stopped in Langon. It's the red dot on the map, the stop between occupied and Free France.
We arrived to the borderline. The town was called Langon, and in Langon the train stopped. And the conductor went through the train and said, everybody out, the train nobody can go any further. And everybody got off, except us. We decided we just stay and wait what they'll say. We asked the conductor, does the train go to Marseille? He said, yes, it'll continue. Okay, so we were sitting there, and when the train was all empty, 2 German soldiers appeared. One walked through the train, and the other one walked outside. It was warm, windows were open. So he walked through the train and looked into every compartment. The European trains have compartments. And so he comes to our compartment, and he doesn't know French, of course, maybe 2 or 3 words. He said, sortir, out. So I pull out I was always the spokesperson because I was very fluent in French. Really, I still speak with very little accent. And I show him this paper. He looked at it, and it had a big stamp. The German commandant in Chateaubriand had stamped it with the swastika and signed it with his signature. And he looked at this paper and sees the stamp. I said to Commandant, vous voyez, Commandant? So he shows it to the other guy outside, and the other guy also doesn't know French too much. And he looks at it, and I said to him, this is a permission spéciale. I told him this is a special, I knew the word special he will understand. It's a special permission. So he thought, we have special permission since it comes from the military, the German military. So we have a special permission. So he said, yeah. And my heart was going like this, And we told the kids not to open their mouths. They spoke German. And so we went, the train started to move, and we crossed the line. And the train stopped again on the free side of Langon. We arrived in Marseille after a long day. We arrived at midnight in Marseille. And as we got off the train, there was the police standing there telling us that we cannot stay in Marseille. We have to wait for the next train and get out of here. Do you mean to say that I, with 2 little children, I can't stay where I want to stay? I have family here. Why do you have to go? So he said, okay, you stay, but you will not find a room here, and you will not find a taxi. So you stay until the morning, you stay in the station. So, which we did.
So we were in the station and sleeping on the tables there. And as my mom mentioned, it was very important that we children not speak on the train because we spoke German at home. If the Nazis heard us speaking German, they would have known that we were German refugees in France. So with the help of my uncle Misha, who worked in Marseille, we rented a house. The men had been let out of the camps and they somehow were able to get together with us in Marseille. So you see our whole family there. The people from whom we rented helped us by always answering the door and keeping our presence secret. The mailman saw lists of Jewish names of people who were going to be collected, and they warned us so that we could protect ourselves. They were real upstanders. It was very dangerous for them to help us. As a matter of fact, they once came, my uncle tried to come and visit, and the woman who answered the door wouldn't let him in. And he said, but my brother lives here. And she said, I never heard of them. So, and one of the nights when the mailman had warned us, we had to sleep somewhere else because they were collecting the Jews. So we can look at pictures of us. There's my whole family with my Aunt Fritzie, and I'm sitting on my mom's lap, and my sister Hannah is there, and my cousin Judy. So the whole family gathered there, and this was still free France when we came in 1940. So we can go forward. I think these are pictures that show me with my Oma, my mother's mother, and my sister with my father's mother. And pictures of my sister, myself, and Judy. And this is all in Marseille. Okay. Things got worse. The Nazis occupied southern France in November of 1942. The final solution for the destruction of all Jews in Europe was being enacted, and Hitler wanted every Jew in Europe dead.
But we were very scared, and every once in a while somebody disappeared. What the police did, they closed up a street and they checked. We had the identification papers. They checked your papers. You're a Jew, they took you just off the street. There was a camp in Marseille that I forgot the name of, but that was a detention center where they collected people from the streets and then sent them, so to speak, to work in Germany. And we did not know of the death camps. We had no idea. Nobody knew, except my husband, who also started to work for Ort.
Ort, where my father worked, was a Jewish training and educational organization, and he taught electronics. This photo was taken in Marseille with one of his classes. It was through his work at Ort that he learned about the death camps. This was a secret he kept to himself to keep the family from panicking, but he insisted that we have to get out of France. We decided to move to Grenoble. It's there on the map if you follow the black arrow. We left Marseille and we moved north. Grenoble bordered Switzerland and was controlled by Italy, which was an ally of Germany. We heard that it was a little safer there. More importantly, it was near the Swiss border, and we began to plan our escape. In December of 1942, Germany had occupied southern France, The Swiss authorities, to appease Hitler and because they were afraid of the huge flow of immigrants, made the rules to enter Switzerland much harder. Some people got to the Swiss border to find that the rules had changed and they would not be accepted into the country. Some people were sent back to France. We had to break up into smaller groups. My aunt and uncle had no children. Having my sister Hannah with them made their chances of getting into Switzerland better. This is when my mother made the hardest decision of her life. She talks about how painful it was to give Hannah to her sister and brother-in-law so that they could escape too. They left a week before we did, and we had no way of knowing if they got through safely.
And they made a ruling that they will not send back people with little children. So that when I made the most difficult decision of my life, I gave one child to my sister so that they went a week before us with Hannah, my older girl, to Switzerland, because we didn't know if they made it or not.
Next, my parents planned our escape. We were the last of the family group to go in December of 1942. There was a train leaving from Grenoble to Switzerland. We waited all night and then it finally came. I was three years old at the time.
Into the train, and the train was packed full. It was in the evening. And we boarded the train and we had no seats, and my husband was running through the train and he came back. I found an empty compartment. I left my coat there. You get out and walk to the back of the train. There you, and we all got out of the train, and the train started to move. And he said, "Oh my God, it was in winter. His only coat, my winter coat." So he jumped on the train to retrieve the coat, and my little girl got absolutely hysterical. "Daddy, my daddy, where's my daddy's going away?" And then, so he jumped off the train with his coat, and the train left without us. Now this was really God's hand, I must say, because on that train, the Germans arrested all the Jews and took them to the camps.
So missing that train saved our lives. We went back to Grenoble to try to find another way. A priest connected us to a guide who would help us cross the border. We would have to walk across the border. And he never showed up. We found out his truck had broken down, so we had to go back and try again. This time, a newspaper delivery man helped us. He hid my father's mother, Oma Rashtowitz, and my father behind stacks of newspapers in back of the truck. My mother and I sat in front with him. He took us as far as he could go. Soldiers at the checkpoints assumed my mother and I were his wife and child. And some probably knew the truth too, because he came through there regularly to deliver newspapers. Then he left us to wait for another guide.
And finally, we came to a spot above the road on a hilly place with a few bushes. And the guide said, "You have to sit here behind the bushes so they can't see you. And another guy who lives here, he will come and will take you to the border." Well, he left. So that was, I think, the worst moment in my life, because you never know. Did he leave you? Did he take your money and just left you in the middle of nowhere? Or what? You just sit there. And we sat for a long time. I mean, it seemed like an eternity. So I started praying, like your mother says. She says the same thing. I started praying and praying. God, if you get us out of this, then nothing will matter. Absolutely nothing. And after a very long time, we saw a little, like a star, far away. But this star was moving. So it was somebody with a lantern. So this came closer and closer, and sure enough, that was a man with a lantern and a bottle of schnapps. He gave us each a drink because we were really frozen, and it had really started to snow. The snow was collecting on my shoulders. And I was holding the baby. It's good she was packed in a blanket, and she still had a pacifier. You know, I couldn't get rid of it, but that was good. So she didn't cry. And then he came and said he'll walk with us, and we had to wade through a river. He had high boots up to his hips, so he carried us over the river one by one, and my husband, impatient as he was, just walked through that river. He had his legs, his whole legs and pants completely soaked, and he walked through the river. Then we came to a barbed wire. He lifted the wire up, and we had to crawl under the wire. And continued and walked, and then he said, that's how far I can go. Because if they catch me, they shoot me. I live here and I have to get along with them. So now you have to continue yourself. And I will tell you exactly how to go. We found the railroad. We crossed and we went down the trestle. No vineyard. Can't see a thing. It's pitch dark. Can't see absolute anything. So we just trotted along and walked, looking for that black tower of a vineyard. We didn't see a black tower. We didn't see a vineyard. We saw nothing. And we got really very scared. And out of nowhere, all of a sudden in front of us, stands a soldier. Gray uniform, what the Germans call Feldgrau. Gray uniform with a German type helmet. And he stands there and says, Halt! Real German accent too. So we thought, now we are caught. I started to cry. Begged him. I said, look, it's women and little baby, and just let us go. And he said, lady, in German, stop crying, you're in Switzerland.
So Swiss records show our border crossing and that we were staatenlos. Staatenlos, it said, you see my name here in red, Eve Catherine. And staatenlos means I have no state, and that I'm Austrian and I'm French. And all the other relatives that came across here. The soldiers took us to a refugee camp where they let us sleep on straw, and they gave us some food. And my mom reported feeling incredible relief. She said, I loved sleeping on straw. I guess I sensed her relief. One of the workers at this transit camp remembered seeing my sister come through a week before. Imagine the relief we felt at this news, and we were reunited shortly thereafter. The Swiss didn't want refugees taking jobs away from their own people or flooding into their towns and cities with no place to live. They were willing to let some refugees in and stay for the duration of the war. To accommodate these people, they created refugee camps. They turned hotels, schools, and other large buildings into these camps. We ended up in 3 different camps. We were not allowed to leave. It was run by the military, and it was also managed communally, so everyone had a job. I remember the sense of relief I had at being safe and that the Swiss had allowed us to stay. Many were turned back, but the Swiss took in thousands despite their small size. They actually admitted 30,000 Jews over the course of several years, but an estimated 20,000 Jews were turned away at the Swiss border, and I shall be eternally grateful to them. They treated us well. We had 1 room per family. Sorry. No heat, but sufficient food. My dad became one of the leaders in the camp. The Swiss made it clear refugees could only stay there until the end of the war. They then had to be resettled into another country. You see the picture here of Hannah and myself, and this was in the refugee camp Saint-Cergue. Okay. We were let out of the camps in 1945 and lived in Geneva for a year while my dad was helping the Swiss government. I was 6 years old by that time. And this was the first time I had lived in a real home with my sister and parents. And my grandma Tony also lived with us as well. And this is us in Geneva when I was 6.5, before we came here. My father helped publish a newspaper, Informationsdienst, and he worked with the Swiss government to help them reunite and repatriate families. In December of 1945, my father's mother, Oma Rastovitz, who lived with us in Geneva, got this letter from her nephew, Carl. It's so upsetting that I can't really read it to you. But Carl let her and my dad know that their entire family had been murdered. And you can read just a couple of sentences there of what it said. It was devastating. Okay. In July of 1946, the war was over and we were finally able to get papers to emigrate to the United States. We'd been trying to get visas throughout the war and before the war. And here we are in a photo. Oma made Hannah and my coats. And when I look at this photo, like, it's hard for me to imagine that I didn't speak 1 word of English. And you see me there, my mom, my father, my mother, Oma and Opa were in France at that point. This was taken in Paris before our trip to the United States. And my Aunt Meta and my Uncle Walter were in the picture. And then on the right are our travel documents. Our flight to New York took 24 hours. We went via Shannon, Ireland and Newfoundland. And my mom tells you what it was like to arrive here.
And we arrived in New York on July the 10th, very, very hot day. There was this lady sitting at the desk where we had to show them our papers. And I was very pregnant with my 3rd child. And she said to me, "Welcome to America. This is your home now." And I still cry when I hear it. because I started to cry because we were not welcome anywhere. For years, nobody welcomed us. And we had to run and to hide, you know. And somebody said, welcome. So that was really some, as little as I understood, but this I understood because it's the same in German. Welcome is willkommen. So that started our new life here with nothing, but it was worth it. And it has changed our outlook in life. All this, we look always for the good in people. My husband was the same way. I learned it from him. He always said, I don't know, this is very bad, but it must be good for something. And he was always on the positive side, and so am I. And that makes life easier. And you don't worry when you sell your house. People ask me, isn't it terrible you sold your house and don't you miss it? I said, no, I don't miss it. Not at all. I was glad to get rid of it. So that is what you learn when you go through things like that. And in a way, I'm grateful that God helped us, because it was really by the grace of God that we escaped. There were 100 moments where it could have gone the other way.
The war had a profound effect on me and my whole family. We all suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, but never lost our optimism and our gratitude. We were grateful to get out of France at the height of the final solution. I realized later in life how many Jews were murdered in Europe between 1939 and 1945. We were among the very few who made it out alive. We left Manhattan and moved into a house in Montclair, New Jersey, when I was 14. It was there that I discovered prejudice. I couldn't become a cheerleader because Jews weren't really allowed to even try out for the team. I did become a football dancer, but learned that African Americans couldn't join that team. I protested and got that rule changed, and African Americans were allowed to participate. So there is me with our team that included some African Americans, and I was very proud of that. Coming from Manhattan, it just didn't seem right to me. And now you see our family grew, and the top left is my mom and dad with my sister Hannah, me, and my brother Alan, who was born here. My mother was pregnant with Alan when we emigrated into this country. You can imagine what that was like. On the right is a 4-generation picture. My grandmother, Oma, my mother, myself, and my baby, Tony, who is now all grown up. You see on the bottom left, my 2 kids, David and Tony. And on the right, the joys of my life, my 6 grandkids, all of them gorgeous. And there's family pictures as well. The one on the right is of when I went on a trip to Israel with Tony and Michael and my 3 grandsons, a little bit taller than I am. Okay. I am dedicated to trying to make sure genocide never happens again to anywhere. I'm also dedicated to the prevention of another Holocaust that now threatens the lives of another 6 million Jews. It's important to fight prejudice and intolerance wherever it happens, and it's important to stay strong and fight the real evil forces in the world. This photo is from our 2002 family reunion, and what Ma says is really what matters.
We lost everything. We have nothing, but we have, the only thing we have is our family. We lost.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Eva, for sharing your presentation. I'm going to take down the shared screen and open the floor to some questions. If people have them, as Michael said before, you can put them into the chat window, or if you raise your hand, we will try and find you and ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question out loud.
I'll go ahead and start first by saying, Eva, thank you for sharing that.
About crypto. He came away from Wednesday's hearing encouraged.
If we could, all right, thank you for sharing that incredibly moving, emotional, and in many ways beautiful story. I was thinking throughout that there was so much strength and perseverance demonstrated by your family, but also the good in others, the bystanders, upstanders, and those who helped. And then you said that this kind of moral was always looking for the good in people. I thought that was beautiful, and it's so nice to see at the end of this slideshow your family and to see them here today. I wanted to ask a question because of how young you were. I was curious to know, you mentioned about this sense of relief when you were younger, arriving in Switzerland. I was wondering what your earliest memory was during this time.
My earliest memories really are in the refugee camp in Saint-Cyr, because, you know, I felt very safe there. And one of the things that happened there was that the Swiss sometimes divided camps up, and they decided to take all the kids out of that camp, families with kids. And the only ones they left were the doctor's family and my father's family, and I think one other family, because my father was helping the Swiss government with refugees. So I sort of had the run of the camp, and I thought it was pretty neat altogether. I was happy there because my parents felt pretty secure, although you have to know that the Nazis were pressuring the Swiss to give up their Jews. And my parents were watching the news very carefully. I remember they were very nervous that if we meaning America and the Allies hadn't won the war, it's probably likely that the Germans would have given in and given up the Jews. So we weren't totally safe, but we were safe there.
There's another question sort of in line with that that was asked, that you were smiling in your photo en route to the United States. And it was asked, what was your understanding of the situation at this time?
Well, I actually was very negative about going to the United States because the year that we spent in Switzerland was like a wonderful year for me. I went to kindergarten there, and I lived with my parents and one of my two grandmas, and it was just a beautiful place to be. You know, the war was ending. And when my parents said that we have to go to the United States, I said, I'm not going. And then we went to Paris, you know, a layover there for a while. And I said, I'm a French citizen, and so I'm staying in France. I'm not going. And so I was very resistant to yet another change because I had never really lived in one place for too long. And here we had come to this great place, and nobody was nervous anymore. So it was hard for me to make that change, and actually even harder when we got here because that was a very difficult time for me.
Thank you. I'll just ask one more question, and then again, I want to just invite others to either use the emoji hand raise. I'll do it on mine so you can see what it looks like, if you can see that, or feel free to unmute yourselves. We'll just take a few more minutes before we wrap up. Just one more question that I'll ask. Was your family ever to claim any of their possessions from Austria? And this is from Randy J.
Well, my mother did an incredible thing. When we were in Chateaubriand, and she still had all her stuff. Of course, when they were going to escape into unoccupied France, they couldn't take anything, just a little suitcase, you know. She packed everything into a big trunk and she put it in with the station master in Chateaubriand. And she got like a ticket, you know, to reclaim it. And there it was for the rest of the time, the rest of the war. And what happened is when the war ended, my uncle and aunt who remained, they never emigrated. My uncle went and claimed the trunk. And he had kept it in a garage in Marseille and then shipped it to the United States once we were in the United States. So she was able to save a lot of stuff that she brought. And the most wonderful thing about it is that they had all these pictures, the pictures that you're seeing, which unfortunately most survivors don't have pictures like that of life in Vienna. And, you know, we have hundreds of pictures, which my son David has put up 2 websites with all kinds of pictures and documents and everything from the wartime, because we got away and were able to claim this trunk. That's why we have all this material, which we're donating all of it to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, working with them.
Eva, I had a couple of other questions I just wanted to mention. One was, I'm wondering about when your mother started sharing details with you about her experience and your experience as a young child. Was that something, you know, did she talk about the Holocaust pretty openly during the course of your childhood, or was that something that got passed over?
Well, what happened is that because our immediate family all got across and escaped into Switzerland, when we came to the United States, my aunt and uncle that, you know, we had been living together with during the war, lived in the same apartment building. We gathered for evenings. Dinner lasted for hours. They came down from their apartment for dessert, and they talked about the war incessantly my entire childhood. That's why, like, when you ask me, what do I remember? I'm not even sure what I remember, because they talked about it so much that they were able to, unlike some other survivors, I think, because they got out. You know, had they not, I mean, there was such euphoria at not only getting out, but getting into this country. My father loved this country. He was 150% American. So I knew all of these stories repeatedly throughout my childhood.
One other thing I noted in your mother's testimony, in the clips that you included, was her commenting about praying to God and her belief in God. And it made me wonder if you grew up in a religious household, if faith was an important part of your life as growing up because of those experiences, or if that didn't translate to as you grew up.
Actually, not. They were very assimilated. My grandparents in Chernovitz had been religious Jews, like all Jews in Eastern Europe were Orthodox. They were completely assimilated in Vienna and not religious. But my mother said that during the war, they were so afraid, they sort of made a promise to God that they would, let us survive, and we're going to keep all the holidays. And, so they came out of it. They were Zionists. They were very committed Jews. They knew history very well. They were well educated, and they transmitted their knowledge, but they were not really observant that much, except for my grandfather. They were not that observant, belonged to a synagogue, but mostly it was around family and Jewish holidays, pretty much like many of us are here today.
Michael, I think you have another question. Do you want to unmute and,
Yeah.
and say it? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And then again, we'll just open if anyone does. Oh, you know what? I'll let Eddie Mantell, my father, speak.
Hi, Eva, and thank you for taking us on the journey. It was unbelievable. I mean, my heart was palpitating listening to you, you know, and it was, my parents were both survivors, and my father lost his whole family, and my mother lost her parents. And I listened to you. I don't know who wrote that letter. Was that your cousin who basically, how did he do after? Because I know my father, you know, had a rough time with it, but was he able to go on? You know, like I always said, how does that generation keep going? You know, was he able to go on?
You know, it's hard for me to know because my grandmother, who that happened to, her family, my Oma Rashtovitz, she lived in France with Meta and Misha. She never emigrated either. So I don't know what she did with the one nephew of hers that survived. I don't know what happened to him. But my father, unlike my mother and her family, my father never talked about the war. He refused. He said goodbye to Europe. As far as he was concerned, he was done. And when he had a contract with NASA, he was an optical physicist, to put a telescope he invented around the world. He refused to go into Austria. He was willing to go in Germany, but he felt that the Austrians lied about how complicit they were with the Nazis. And he never set foot there again, although he traveled around the world.
My
So
father
he never talked about the Holocaust and or what happened to his family. He just didn't go there.
My father never spoke about it. My mother basically force-fed me every day. I heard the stories every day. My father, yeah. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Maybe we can call in Nurit has a question.
Did I unmute myself?
You did.
Yes, Eva, first, I really would love to thank you for this survival story. It was amazing to me how it included the different ingredients that are so necessary for survival: good luck, the help of others, but above all, resilience and resourcefulness, which is so familiar to me from survival stories. As you know, it applies to my family too, and also to my work. But what I want to ask you is, you mentioned post-traumatic stress, which of course is obvious. You were a very young girl when the most horrific parts of your journey took place. And what I want to try and understand, do you believe that you, at that time, being young, experienced the anxiety and stress firsthand? Or do you believe that your post-traumatic stress is basically a result of exposure to the adults who are so stressful and overwhelmed? How did it happen, that part?
Well, it's hard to say. You know, I know that I had nightmares as a kid. I was overly attached to my mother. I've always been afraid of travel. I'm nervous about anything new and different, because you're right, my mother was that way too. If my father was 10 minutes late for dinner, she was standing by the window. Where is he? I think something must have happened. He's not here. They were so nervous about everything that we did. So yes, it is that. But I think, from what I understand, is that if you're young and you don't know what's happening, but your parents are stressed out and constantly stressed, and things are happening and you have no anchor, you're not in one place, that it has an effect as well. So I have to come and see you for many therapy sessions to figure that one out.
No, it's very interesting, because studies of babies during the war, babies that were orphans, etc., as you probably know, found out that the babies became depressed. They somehow, in ways that are not totally clear, somehow absorbed it, even if
Right.
nothing was told, nothing was said. So, yeah. But you're a survivor in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuri. I think there's somebody else, Ruth Zuckerbrand. I think you had a question, and then Susan Hirschenhaus. So Ruth, can you unmute?
Now, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Eva, your mother was an incredible woman. I can't imagine her going through such a horrific life. I mean, it amazes me that someone can have that kind of strength. And what I wanted to ask you was, what kind of an adjustment was it for you when you came to the States? I mean, you were how old? How old were you?
I was 6.5.
Okay, you didn't speak any English.
No.
No. So how was that adjustment? You went to school and you learned English quickly?
It
Was it
was,
difficult?
it was a terrible adjustment because, I mean, none of us spoke any English. It wasn't just the language, but because there was a housing shortage, we ended up living on the edge of Harlem. And I went to school. I was the only white child in my class in a school in Harlem. And it was a very tough neighborhood. And so that was very difficult. I didn't want to go to school. My mother let me play hooky a lot. I didn't learn very much. And so it wasn't like a positive experience being here. Having come from Geneva, I was not happy, and I just had a very hard time with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this amazing story. And your mother was an incredible woman. I see the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Okay.
Susan Hirschenhaus, did you have a question? Do you want to unmute?
Yeah. So, Eva, my family also came from Vienna, so I was very interested in your family's experience. And again, I am overwhelmed with compliments for your mother's strength with young children to be able. It sounded like she was the leader. And, to be able to make these decisions and to go through all of the different steps that she went through to save her family, to me is amazing and heart-rending. And I also just want to say that there are commonalities. Something you said just really, really rang a bell for me. That was always that my parents were my mother in particular hated change, and she hated, new things. She always just wanted to keep everything as it was. And when my father was late coming home from work on the subway, she would sit by the window and say he was accosted on the subway, he's lying somewhere, someone murdered him. And, it just, that ongoing trauma of, the fear that, something terrible has happened to someone that you love, seemed to have kind of followed her through her life, as I think it probably did for your mother. But I do want to just say thank you for sharing your family story, and it was remarkable. Okay.
And I want to mention that this kind of anxiety that you were just describing, unfortunately, I tried not to, but I handed it down to my kids who are on this Zoom. They can tell you that when they went out to play, and then we were living in Great Neck, I was very nervous, and I told them they were only allowed to ride their bicycles right around the block, you know, not near, they couldn't go any further than that. And I found out in later years that they actually did and
Of
didn't
course.
tell me because they knew how protective I was, right, Tony? She's laughing.
I think we have one last question from Zona Schreiber. Zona, do you want to share?
Yeah. Hi. Eva, you haven't spoken about this. I have that other. You haven't spoken about Hannah. Now, I was wondering how Hannah was affected by this, if you ever discussed it with her, or was she in any way, you know, different than you?
Well, Hannah's very different. So she was almost 10 when we came here. She's 3 years older than I am. And she was horribly affected by it because she had different memories than I had. She remembered my father, and I guess it's very young. It had an effect, but says she did remember my father being arrested, things like that. And she's had a very difficult time. I mean, she studied this stuff, but now she can't even deal with it at all. It's been, in some ways, more destructive for her for many reasons. But it was not good for her, no.
Eva, I want to close our program, but I wanted to say thank you to you and to say that we recognize that sharing this story is not an easy thing.
Right.
And maybe not easy for us to hear, or for some people on this session to hear. But we value you sharing it, and we value hearing it, and we want to sustain those memories and those stories. So thank you for doing that. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs soon. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.